Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our AI and college admissions webinar today. We are focusing on future-proofing admissions and learning today about the legislations and compliance that are impacting us, especially as deployers of AI. And today we are joined by Shay Brown from Babel AI, who will be sharing with us about some of the legislation that is already on the books and how it impacts our work. So welcome, Shay. Thank you for being with us today. We also have Jeffrey Recker from Babel, who will be in the chat, helping to answer questions there, but we do strongly encourage you to use the Q&A. We do plan on leaving quite some time at the end of this for discussion and answering your questions, and so encourage you to use the Q&A feature to add your questions there. All right, Jay, you can take it away and share some information with our group.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm Shay Brown, CEO and founder of Babel AI, and I'm going to share my screen now, and and hopefully I will be able to find my screen, which sometimes takes a second. There we go. And there we go. Okay. So, um, So I'm going to talk about really the regulations here, and at sort of a high level because they all have little details, and I'm going to try to kind of work from first principles as much as possible. But the key takeaway points is that obviously AI is being used in admission processes on sort of both sides, and you all know that, and but there are new regulations that require sort of careful management of risks, and I'll talk about what that means in a second. And that there are things you can do proactively to sort of address some of these risks. So, um, Babel, so a little bit about who we are. We're an AI audit and assurance firm. So we actually audit AI systems. We audit organizations that produce AI systems. And we work a lot in the ed tech sector. We also audit organizations that deploy AI systems. And these are sort of a mix between compliance audits, uh, assurance engagements around providing stakeholders with some comfort about people managing risks, um, and also technical audits, really testing for bias, testing for accuracy, robustness. Um, we are also founding members of the International Association of Algorithmic Auditors. We're members of the US AI Safety Institute Consortium, and mostly, we're a lot of researchers. A lot of us are professors. I was a professor of astrophysics for 11 years at the University of Iowa. We have a lot of lawyers, and we really do focus a lot on research and R&D, uh, and also policy in this area. So I just came back from California where I was testifying on actually a bill which will impact college admissions if passed. So here's a one slide about AI in college admissions, and I don't think I need to sort of point out the fact that it is getting used uh, by this group and to this group, but it helps in efficiency. So there's a lot of adoption. Automated screening is one obvious place where it could be used, probably one of the more risky places. Analyzing essays, uh, assisting interviews, um, predictive analytics. And one thing I'll say, I produced this with using AI, and it did a really poor job. This is one thing I'll say is that AI is not doesn't always do a great job, and it makes a lot of mistakes. And so I think that we'll focus on this again more as we progress. But AI is really good at coming up with super impressive sounding results that are often fairly misguided and not very accurate. And this is the theme that we have to deal with. It's not there. And as much as vendors will claim that the AI is super accurate, it can miss things very often, and especially if they haven't evaluated things. So I'm going to start off with sort of the regulation that has the most number of obligations, and this is the EU AI Act. And so the act, this is just the timeline, and so the place where, and it's not going to impact all of you, especially in the US, but it will have some impact. But the deadline here is the important one. This is August of 2026 because this is the obligations for high-risk systems in Annex 3. Um, and if you're worried, I'm going to talk very soon about Colorado, and Colorado is coming a little bit sooner right here. And so the timeline is ticking fairly quickly. And here's some definitions. And they talk about providers of AI systems. And in the Colorado law, they use developers as a term, but these are your vendors. These are the people who are coming and trying to sell you their products. And if you're working at a university or helping at college admissions at a high school, you're going to be a deployer of an AI system. And so just to keep the terminology set here. And the EU AI Act has a sort of tiered system of risk. And so AI, as it's used in college admissions, is going to be considered a high risk AI system. And Annex 3, if you're looking it up and you want to find that definition, it's going to be in Annex 3. So it's high risk, and high risk has the most obligations. Prohibited risk, you just can't do, it's illegal. You can use high risk systems, but there are a huge number of obligations. And here's the Annex 3 where it talks about education and vocational training. So uh, there is a common misconception, probably not with this group because you're very well informed, that using AI in any kind of setting, like an educational setting that is considered high risk, would be a high risk AI system. That's not really true. It has to be used in a particular way. So AI systems intended to be used to determine access or admissions or assign some sort of vocational training, different sort of levels, uh, evaluate learning outcomes. So professors need to worry about this, or universities in terms of being responsible as deployers, um, assessing appropriate levels of education, and then this is going to be sort of the remote proctoring, and we've done a lot of work auditing systems in this area. And so it's going to be considered high risk under the EUA Act if you're using it to make consequential decisions. And there are going to be a number of obligations for deployers of high risk AI systems. And it's likely that as an institution, if you are a university, you are going to probably be both the deployer of AI systems, and you're probably also going to be developing some of them internally. And I'll talk a little bit about the nuances here. But if you're in scope of the EU AI Act, you're going to need things like quality management systems, risk management systems. Now, here are the providers. So the vendors you are talking to, if they work anywhere in Europe, so even if you're in the US at a US institution, let me move our faces out of the way so that we can see everything here. Um, Even if you're in a US institution, and the providers, the vendors who are coming to you probably are selling in Europe as well. And so they're going to have done all of these things. So these are obligations for providers of high-risk system. They're going to have a quality management system. They're going to have to keep logs. They're going to have to register in the European database. They're going to have a declaration of conformity. They don't need it right now. So you can ask for it right now, and I'll talk about that in a second. They don't need it at this moment. But at the AI system level requirement, they're going to have to do a lot more. So you can expect that they need to have had a risk management system in place. They have to have data governance in place. They have to have some very clear technical documentation that's understandable by you. They have to keep records. They need to send you information, and this is going to be common. A lot of these are actually common between the Colorado law and the EU. EU just has slightly more. They should have transparency and information that they give to the deployers. And so you should expect that they have very clear instructions of use, and they will deliver that to you, and it has to have all the features that you need to understand the risk of these systems. If it's possible, they need to have provisions for human oversight. Sometimes that's not the case. And importantly, they also need to have tested these systems for things like accuracy, robustness, and also cybersecurity concerns. So these are for providers, but it's good to be aware of as deployers to know that they need to do these things, and you're welcome to ask. Now, as a deployer of a high-risk AI system, and this is going to be mostly relevant for people who are in European universities, you're going to have obligations as deployers. So one important obligation that I'm going to point out, and there's a lot here, and I don't want to go through everything. Um, One is to actually follow the provider's instructions. Now, and then, data protection impact assessments, notifications are going to be very common, and we can talk more about that when we get to the Colorado law. Um, Monitoring all of this. If you're as a public institution in Europe, and this is really only true for public institutions, you will have to do a fundamental rights impact assessment. Now, you can think of these as human rights impact assessment applied to the particular AI system. And this is going to also be true of the Colorado law. So as deployers, um, you need to think about how you're assessing the impact of the use of these systems. Now, following the instructions of the provider, why am I bringing this up and emphasizing it? It is because in both cases, in the Colorado law, which I'll talk about in a second, and the EU AI Act, if you get these instructions and you deviate significantly from the instructions of use, then you will inherit the requirements of the provider. So, to give you an example, if you let's say you have your university has a private GPT, maybe they got it through Microsoft subscription, and you have like a co-pilot, right? That's an AI system. And let's say your internal team at the university starts using that co-pilot to do things like start sorting through admissions applications, right? Or looking through extracting information in a way that's being used to make decisions about admissions. Uh, if you're using that co-pilot to do that, if you go look at the terms of use of Microsoft, I'm willing to bet that it has, in fact, I'm almost positive in most cases, it will have provisions in there that it does not want you to use that to make any kind of critical decisions. There are going to be tons of caveats in there. So the problem here is if you are using their tool in a way that is beyond their instructions, then you will inherit all of these requirements for as a provider of an AI system. And this is also true in Colorado. So one thing, because we work with a lot of providers and deployers of these high risk systems. And we know for a fact that you are going to start seeing uh, instructions of use, which are going to be very narrowly scoped so that they try to make it so that they're not a high risk system. So the co-pilot will have language about don't use this in these circumstances. It can make mistakes, all of these caveats. And so that means that they're going to try to avoid these obligations, which means if you use them to make critical decisions, you are going to inherit you will now have to have a risk management system and a data governance and technical documentation, a quality management system like this. So that's just one thing that I wanted to highlight. Now, let me move our faces again. Let's talk about the Colorado AI Act. And I know we probably got some questions coming in, and I don't want to take too long on this because I think it's better to open it up to a discussion. Colorado passed a very similar law with some slight differences, and those differences are pretty relevant. So one difference is it's coming sooner. And for those of you in the US, this is going to be more relevant. Um, it's coming sooner, February 1st, 2026. And college admissions is explicitly a high risk, using it to make kind of consequential decisions. Now, again, there's a difference between a consequential decision and just using it to extract data or some operational uses of AI to make efficiencies. But even then, you have to be very careful to make sure that some mistake in that process doesn't lead to some consequential, let's say, filtering of particular students. Um, and so colleges using these systems need to take reasonable steps to prevent algorithmic discrimination. They need to, here are the impact assessments. They're going to be very similar to those fundamental rights impact assessments. And one key difference from the EU AI Act and from the Colorado law is that the Colorado law focuses very particularly on discrimination. So bias is front and center here, and it's not in the EUA Act. It's mentioned in the EUA Act. It's a fundamental right, the right to not be discriminated against, the right to an education. Those are fundamental rights which are protected and are mentioned in the EU AI Act. The Colorado law calls it out explicitly. And so bias and any kind of potential filtering of people based on protected categories, that is the biggest risk I think that the Colorado law is trying to tackle here. And so that should be front and center when you're thinking about complying with these. So as a deployer, um, there are these obligations. Now, Colorado is not the only. Now, I'll mention this. This image here is of the NIST risk management framework, because in the Colorado law, for deployers, they call out the specific need to have essentially risk management policies in place. And they call out two different, in particular, risk management frameworks or AI management systems in one case that sort of would apply and be useful. One is the NIST. NIST has an AI risk management framework, which is sort of what I'm showing you here, where they have this sort of govern, map, measure, manage type framework, and they have characteristics of trustworthy AI systems. And then also ISO 42001. So some of you will be familiar with ISO standards and ISO for information security. Uh, and 42001 is a AI management system standard. And that is a standard that you can get a certification for. And so in the Colorado law, they basically call out those two as something that deployers will need something like that. And I think that it would help as a sort of a presumption of conformity if you have some kind of risk management system in place that's more formal. Um, so in the case of providers, you need to use reasonable care to prevent algorithmic discrimination. These are the vendors. So that keep in mind that when you're talking to vendors, these are the things that they need to have in place. They need to provide documentation to the universities, intended uses and foreseeable risks, training data, and known limitations. So how do they train the data? Bias testing and mitigation efforts, instructions of use for ongoing monitoring. They do have to actually produce a public summary of these high-risk systems. They have to notify the Attorney General of Colorado if there's any incidences. And they don't have to disclose trade secrets. Be careful here because not everything is a trade secret. So there's probably a lot of stuff you can ask for that they can't hide behind. So be careful when you're considering third-party vendors. So, and now this is my last slide, and we can have a more open conversation. Uh, these are questions that if you are developing things internally in your university, you need to ask these questions of those teams that are developing it. But have you tested your AI system for bias or potential discrimination? That is something that they should be doing if they are selling to universities, and this is something that is used to make consequential decisions. They had better do that testing, and we audit organizations all the time. We know that people do this, and so they should be able to show you the results. That is not the accuracy of a system or the level of bias of a system is not proprietary, or it shouldn't be. You should be able to see the results of that testing. So if they say they've tested it, just say, show me the results. Screen share it if they don't feel comfortable emailing it. Have you had those results audited? And yes, that is a thing. Babbel as a company, we audit, especially in the hiring space, and a lot of the algorithms that are used in admissions are the same kind of algorithms and the same kind of systems that are used for hiring people. And we audit those people all the time. And so you can have test results audited to verify that they're accurate. Um, do you have a AI risk or quality management system? So things like NIST, AI RMF, ISO 42001, ask because either they have it or they're on their way to getting it. And if they don't, then ask them what they do have. Show them, ask for results of some documentation about their process for mitigating risk. You can ask directly, do you comply with these laws? And there are more state laws coming. California is going to have it. I'm sure New York will have it at some point soon. These are it's going to continue to roll out. So, do you comply with these laws? You can just ask. Now, in the case of the EU, they should actually have a declaration of conformity. They probably don't have it yet, but as the end of the year approaches, it's more and more likely that these vendors should have some kind of declaration that they say we comply with these laws. Have you tested the system for, so forget bias for a second, accuracy, validity, and robustness. So a lot of these tools are claiming to do very impressive things, but have they tested to make sure that those systems are actually doing those things? They should have, and they should also show you the results. So don't be afraid to ask for actual results. Now, and analyzing it, don't worry if you're not that technical. Analyzing it is not that hard. Accuracy is just going to be a percentage. They should be able to give you reasonable amount of information on what they've done for their system. That is not proprietary. That doesn't tell you what the system, how the system was built, but it does tell you whether it works or not. So you should be able to ask for that. And then to the point I made earlier about this problem with inheriting some obligations that a provider might have, you want to look at those instructions of use. Make sure that the instructions of use actually comply with the relevant laws, because there are specific things they need to send you. So just the first easiest thing is just to ask them, does it already comply with the relevant articles in the EU AI Act or the Colorado law? Um, and importantly, do these instructions limit the way in which you can use that tool? Because you want to avoid the danger of using a tool in a way that was somewhere in the fine print not allowed. And then if somebody asks, a regulator asks, and it turns out you've inherited the provider requirements or the developer requirements, then that could be a problem. So I'm going to stop there. This was a sort of a crash course and a sort of a high level overview, but I'm happy to talk details.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I know there were a lot of questions in the chat or comments in the chat about interest in the slides and in the questions for a recording. So yes, this is being recorded. It will be posted after the session. Normally I get them up within a day or two because Zoom has to transcribe it first for closed captioning. So it'll be on YouTube soon after. But please do continue submitting your questions in the Q&A. I'm going to do a quick overview of my role at NYU and what I'm thinking about as a deployer. So then hopefully that will stir some questions in your brain that you can ask us. So if you don't know me already, I'm Jasmine Solomon. I'm the Senior Associate Director of Systems at NYU, and I work in our undergraduate admissions team. I support for our team all three of our campuses. So we are a global institution. So we operate in New York, in Abu Dhabi, which is in the UAE, and in Shanghai, which is in China. And then we also admit students to sites within the EU. So the EU AI Act is very familiar to me at this point because we have folks coming into Florence and Italy, Paris, Madrid, and then also in the UK, we have students that we're admitting straight into London and operating sites there. And so that means that all of these different places in the world and their legislation impact us at NYU. And so we have an entire global privacy team that really dives into that audit part that Shay was sharing about and like thinking about this. I went to a session with them earlier this month, and they shared that they have a 5-page document that's required for each vendor to fill out because they're caring about laws across the globe. And so there's so many different questions they have to ask to make sure that they're in compliance globally and that we're not onboarding a product that can only be used by certain campuses or certain teams. And that's not accessible to everybody. And for myself, a lot of what we're doing right now is sort of vendor searches and upskilling. So we have in our enrollment management division monthly AI lunch and learns where we're sharing knowledge. Within undergraduate admissions, we have an AI group that we've just formed that has representation from all of our teams that's looking both at new vendors, but also really importantly at existing vendors. Because pretty much every vendor you're working with right now is shopping a new AI tool or a new AI feature that's coming out. And that means that you can't just look for new and future. You have to look at all of your existing contracts and your existing tool stack to really consider, is this tool something that I can still work with safely? Is it in compliance? Are they rolling out this tool half-baked, or are they really focusing on all of this legislation and how it impacts us? That's a little bit about me and how I'm thinking about AI. And I do see we have a question already in the chat from Eric Hudson, which is, are there questions that high school counselors should be asking colleges about AI as they guide students through the application process? So Shay, I don't know if you want to jump in and then I can share some thoughts too.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say quickly because I think you're probably better positioned here, someone's directly involved in the process. But I will note that the both regulations do require notification, and in some cases, actually, some recourse. So you can ask to what extent is
Mhm.
AI being used in the application process, and I think that that may have some impact on how students apply. But at the very least, I think that transparency is going to be required in the future.
Yeah, no, I agree. Transparency is a key part in most of these legislations. And so I think when you're talking with colleges, you should be really specific in how you're asking the question to get the answer you're seeking. Because a lot of colleges are very happily and openly sharing about how they're using AI in customer service. And that's kind of like the answer you'll get if you're just like, how do you use AI? They'll be like, I have this amazing chatbot. Let me tell you all about it. But if you're actually wanting to ask about like in the review process, where is AI playing a part? Then that's the question you need to ask to get the transparent answer that you're seeking.
I, excuse me. Jeffrey, nice to meet you all. Also, I saw someone was from Kansas City, or from Kansas City, or grew up there. So enjoy the tornadoes, as I'm not there right now. But I want to add one thing to that about high school counselors. Share best practices for the AI that's being used because each AI is going to be its own little thing, and different ways to like prompt answers can do different results. So if you have like a Gen AI model, that's going to do something very different than say a simpler model, and just the way you write a sentence or contextualize something can drastically impact how the AI reacts. So if there's just like best practices for whatever you're using, like a good, FAQ or something or a tutorial can add a lot of value for the students.
Yeah. Thank you. And we have another question that I think is very much in Shay and Jeffrey's lane. So this is from Megan, and it's, are you finding that vendors are prepared to answer these compliance questions? Are they somewhat unprepared, or is there a mix that you're finding?
Yeah, there's definitely a mix. So there's a big difference in quality between vendors. And so it's one of those things that like somebody on our team could probably within 10 minutes very quickly ascertain whether they are actually doing something or they just have like a Google Doc that has some policies on it. But you will get all of that. You will get a mix of people who are fully understand the regulations, they understand how they need to mitigate risk, and they're prepared to answer those questions. And they'll be honest. Some of them will say, "We understand that there are these requirements. We know that they're not in effect yet, but here's our path towards becoming compliant 6 months from now." That's a well-prepared answer. Um, there will be others that will not have any idea, unfortunately, and that's a red flag. So in particular around the testing, because a lot of these systems, it's going to be very important how they've tested it. So if you take a very simple example, let's say somebody is selling a product which is going to use generative AI, a large language model, because most of them now are based on large language model, to extract information out of an application from a student and fill in particular forms, right? Maybe recalculate GPAs, get the GPAs out, get the relevant experiences that they've had. Uh, that seems like an administrative task, right? But as I said before, AI makes mistakes all the time. And so that vendor should have validated in some way the level of accuracy. How often does it miss and we make a mistake? How often does it get the wrong information? because the student put their GPA 3 different ways and it got the wrong one and put it in. And you also have to think, because it's going to affect the way you make decisions based on that, or affect the level that you've tested. They should have tested for that sort of thing. And if they haven't, if they feel unprepared for that kind of answer, that's a critical thing where you're inheriting that risk. And so I would say there is a big mix. You can't count on the fact that even if they sound like they know what they're doing, they actually do. And so um, just be wary, because there really is a big range.
Yeah, and I'll jump in there because that's such a key example, that whole transcript, OCR, optical character recognition, and then AI powered behind it. And it's something that a lot of vendors are pushing for us right now. At NYU, we use STARS, which is a self-reported academic record system. And they did a beta with that last year. They're talking about it being rolled out more robustly this cycle. And so I just want to share, just so for folks who are listening to that and then feeling scared, some of the like ways that we think about how we can ensure that the data is accurate. Because there's going to be a kid who uploads a crumpled transcript and it's gonna be scanned poorly. And that same kid who pulled a crumpled transcript out of their backpack and thought, yep, this is perfect, is likely not going to do the step that STARS tells them to do of verifying line by line and checking off for accuracy. They're just going to say, check all, submit, done. And so we know we're going to get bad data. It's just facts. Like, you have to understand that you're dealing with 17-year-olds providing you data. And so we do have some checks and balances in place where we take the data that was the GPA that was calculated and have a query that's looking to see like how different is it, the one that was calculated based on the line by line grades versus the one that was just grabbed from the bottom of the transcript. If there's a variance there, then we have to look at that record as humans and get in there and look at the data and validate it. And then we also require the school report through Common App. And so we do another check there to see like what's the difference between the school reported GPA that came from a counselor, that came from a trusted human who's an adult, versus the one that the student reported when they self-reported their academic record. And so we've had those checks and balances in place since we started using their software, long before AI became part of it. But now those will be a much more robust part of our process. We'll probably increase the, or rather decrease the variance range so that we're checking more records, knowing that there's AI involved, and making sure that we are doing those checks on our side as a deployer. Okay. We do have another question in here that I don't want to steal Jeffrey's thunder because I learned about one of these states in his article, in his newsletter from Babel. But what other states, if any, are considering similar bills to Colorado?
Jay, you want to tackle this? I think I can add on to what you will say.
Yeah. So, I mean, the one that I think is that I know is closest is California. I mean, I think so. I can't speak. I know we have a big list at Babbel, and maybe Jeffrey will share that. We can share that list later. But California is proposed, and they proposed several times for automated decision systems where education is part of that. It looks very much like the Colorado bill. uh, the somebody had asked about testifying and why I was testifying. I was testifying because they're adding auditing as a requirement to that, and we're auditors. And so I know for sure that California, and even if California, the bill doesn't pass, the Civil Rights Council of California is progressing basically amendments to the Civil Rights Code, which would make it requirement anyway. Um, so all I know for sure is California, but I know that there a lot of different states are proposing it.
Yeah, and I can add a bit to that too. So as EU, as the European Union has like this one holistic law thing that's happening this side of the ocean, even though I'm in Germany right now, I still refer to myself as American. It's more fragmented. So cities, counties, states, industry specific stuff is coming through. So Colorado is the first one that is an actual law that's going to need to be compliant with. There's a law in Illinois and a law in New York City for more specific stuff Oh, and Colorado as well for like insurance providers. There's an HR law in New York. And so one of the struggles is going to be there's more fragmentation. So there might be stuff that's super specific. So if you have like a hiring tool and you're based out of New York, now you need to be compliant with this one very specific law. But in terms of overarching laws, what Shay said, California is likely it. And there's probably going to be more copycats like New York. I think Washington, D.C. had something, but many states are proposing many different things. And unfortunately, that makes it way more complicated.
Yep.
But that being said, if you focus on one of those big ones like the EU or Colorado, that's going to help cover most of your compliance needs.
Yeah, the one I was thinking of was also Virginia that just got it vetoed, but it was vetoed because there was too much burden on small businesses like startups. So that will likely get a revision and then brought through soon.
Yeah,
But
a lot of it's just a matter of time. Like I
mhm.
think, even void of political lines, there's an understanding that these tools are flawed, or they have impacts on human lives. And so there's just an awareness, and with awareness comes legislation. When that is, where it is, how it looks, that's the question.
Yeah, and I definitely agree that even if you are currently in a jurisdiction that's not, doesn't have a law on the books yet, we all know how slow education moves sometimes, and onboarding a new vendor, onboarding a tool takes time. And so you do want to make sure that you are making sure that they're compliant with a legislation that's out there. And if you're in the US, the Colorado one is a great one to lock onto because they're likely providing to some institution within that state, even if you're not in that state. So it'll be very important to make sure that you're picking the right vendors as you're moving through this.
And I'll say something too on top of that. So something advice I give all the time is find your North Star. So if it's that like big law, just have that be your measurement that you're gonna put all of your if it's compliance or just best practices there. And you have the power. The vendors are selling into your organization. So once you define where you want to be, they have to come to that to sell to you. So
Yeah.
many
Um,
more questions. Do you want to keep asking the questions? I
sure.
can, otherwise I can.
Oh, no, go ahead. Why don't you ask the next one?
All right. Can you define AI in quotes for the purpose of this discussion? I've heard various tech folks point out that this or that is actually machine learning, not AI, or just algorithm and not AI. That is a brilliant question. And Shay, you want to tackle that?
Yeah. So for the purposes, so it almost does, it doesn't really matter. I think some of the conversations around AI versus machine learning is kind of ridiculous because all modern AI is based on machine learning, so that's irrelevant. A lot of the like I don't think for the purpose of Colorado and the EU AI Act, if you are making an inference based on inputs, so if even if it's a formula, to be totally honest, you probably are going to be in scope. So because there could be easily arguments for like, how did you come up with that formula? Probably you were looking at data, and that's sort of one of the key requirements that it's been formulated based on data. So I think all of it's in scope. If you think about taking in data that has to do with people, making an inference based on that, whether it's just ordinary machine learning or generative AI, it's going to be in scope. And even sort of like linear regression and that's all of AI is basically a bunch of linear regressions stacked on top of each other. So it's all going to be in scope.
Yeah, and I'd say sometimes from a legal perspective, there's some semantics there where they're kind of cherry picking what they're looking for. But the EU AI Act, it's very clear about automated decision tool, right? So it's not about, is it machine learning? It's more about the impact and how it's being used and, what it is. So I would just focus more broadly. Don't get lost in the weeds of language. Um, all right. Is there a peer developed, not sanctioned by NACAC or anything official, list of AI vendors from quote best to quote worst in Babbel's opinion, or a star rating guide? That is a great idea. Shay?
So there isn't. I mean, like I said before, we could easily come up with it if everybody was willing to be honest and talk. So I think unfortunately at this point there's not a consumer rating that has to deal really specifically with AI compliance. And I've seen some organizations kind of propose something like this, and unfortunately, um, they're not really getting at the things that are really germane to risk. And so, to be honest, the best way to do it is going to be to ask those questions similar to what Jasmine mentioned and the list that I had at the other end is demand some transparency, and I think you will quickly see when the result, well, unfortunately, they have access to generative AI as well. So there is a very good chance that depending on the size of the vendor or the seriousness of them, they will quickly generate something that sounds really amazing. And so there has to be that next step. And so as the kind of process, and I know not all the universities have the resources for this, to have sort of capabilities assessments and actually run pilots with these firms to make sure that they work well with your data and the results are actually accurate. So there's no easy solution here, and I think as an organization, it would be great. Like this organization could somehow propose something like that.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to that. Great idea, great initiative if anyone wants to take that on. Two, there are some like independent parties, non-for-profits that are doing some efforts. Like the ACLU has depository of AI audits on hiring tools for that New York law, for instance. Another one is the uh, what's it called? Internet Incident Database. Basically, they track various incidences, lawsuits, risk that apply to certain tools. And it's not like a repository where you can kind of gauge and measure against people, but it's a good way to see, hey, has this organization been flagged for something that's come up? But nothing beyond that I'm aware of, at least. Anyone aware of how NACAC is addressing getting ahead of the use of AI in college admissions? Seems to me that all U.S. universities should adopt, share best practices.
Yeah, so I know that that is something that NACAC is working on. If you take their newest iteration of the ethics course, they do have use of AI as part of their new ethics course, and they have, I think it's 3 iterations of that, whether you're on the institution side, an independent counselor, or working as a school-based counselor. So that's something that you can look at. If you are a NACAC member, it's only $40, so it's not a huge investment, and you can certainly only have one member of your team do it and then report back out. That's actually what we're doing, and my team member hasn't finished it yet, so I can't share exactly what's in the course as it relates to AI ethics. But AICA does have a policy group, and so we are, if you're deeply interested in that, you can reach out to me after, and we are happy to get you connected with the folks who are chairing that policy groups because we do want and see the need for there to be a more unified approach to the policies that we share with students from the institution side. I think we all learned some valuable lessons when we went through the test optional period in the pandemic, and every school had slightly different ways of phrasing that, and it became very confusing for applicants and counselors to navigate that. And we don't want that here with AI use policies, especially for students who are trying to write one essay and submit it on the Common App, and now they have to worry about, does it meet 6 different or 20 different schools policies for how I used AI to brainstorm my essay, or how I used Grammarly to check if my grammar was good in my essay. But I don't see a world where there will be one policy, because there are currently schools that say you can't work with an independent counselor at all, and there are schools that say you can work with an agent. And here is our list of approved agent partners. So like, since there's already that sort of difference, I think though that it will likely follow that trend, where you can kind of say, if a school says it's okay to work with an agent or with an independent counselor, then they'll likely be okay with you using AI. And if they say that you can't at all, then they might not be okay with you using AI. Not that it would be as black and white as that, but I think that that's a good guide as you're entering the cycle and schools haven't published policies yet. Because personally, not speaking for my institution, but speaking for myself, I see AI for student use a lot as an access issue. Where if we're saying you can pay someone to review your essay and help you as an adult if you don't have one at your school, but you can't ask Grammarly to review it, that doesn't seem fair to me. Because if an adult would do it for you and tell you that you used the wrong there, then why shouldn't Grammarly be able to do that for you? So I try to look at it that way. But I hope that by the time we get to NAGAC and the conference in September, many more schools will have policies posted and that there will be some commonalities there.
So I don't know if Sherry wants to add to that, but I did write a list of questions I think might be helpful to the conversation as well, as I don't see more questions. But if more questions pop up, I'll prioritize those. Shay, do you think you could break down what high risk means, what it is in terms of the EU Act, and how it might be different from, say, the Colorado law?
So high risk, so in both cases, they have a very specific list. So that they have a list of domains in which is considered high risk. So, and they're very similar. I would say Colorado actually probably goes a little bit further. It is more explicit about it. So that's education is one. Hiring is another. Uh, when you're making credit decisions, housing decisions in the case of Colorado. But on top of those domains, I think the overarching principle is that when consequential decisions are being made, so consequential is something that would materially affect somebody's life, so positive or negatively, and in particular in domains where they already have kind of civil liberties and we have laws in place. And I mean, most of these AI regulations are just trying to enforce laws that already exist. You already can't you can't discriminations against the law, right? You know, there are consumer protection laws, the FTC Act, and there are fair housing laws, that sort of thing. And so, I mean, and we have a lot of clients who are big and have many AI systems, both as providers and as deployers. And so it's very tough to sort of categorize what do I consider high risk. And so for us, we always fall back on first principles, which is to say, who are the stakeholders that are going to be affected by this, and what rights, what interests they have. Let's not go all the way to rights. What interests do they have that this system could potentially affect? And for some subset of those interests, do they rise to the level of us having obligations to protect those interests? Now, human rights is the highest level of that, where that's the state has obligations. But as an organization, you have obligations and commitments to protecting those interests. Now, I know what I'm describing sounds like a lot of work to do, but it's actually not such a hard thing, and it's actually a really good exercise. So in any of these cases, thinking through how am I using AI separate from the college admission, just you know, in an institution, this goes for things like remote proctoring. This goes for different ways you could use AI internally for hiring and promotion. But to think about who the stakeholders are, what are their interests, what effect does these decisions have on those interests, and do those interests, do we have duties to somehow protect those interests? And then the final step there is what are the exact features of this algorithmic system that are going to impact that. So in the case of extracting data, how consequential is it if somebody misses the G or misclassifies the GPA? So if NYU didn't have any extra checks, so there's like the you know the student has to go through line by line. They've had clear instructions for that. That's check number one. They have other checks where there's a flag that goes to human review. Those are all mitigations for that one feature where something could have gone wrong. And I think that as we integrate, if we want the efficiencies from these things, think about what are the consequential impacts on the interests of the stakeholders. Anyway, also, that was a long-winded answer, but I think thinking first principles is way better than going down the list because it gets you further towards the solution.
That was awesome. All right. How to ask developers for these questions that you're going to have on like procurement, compliance, and how do you trust them? And you kind of already hit this already a little bit, but maybe expand more on like what to ask for, how to ask for it. Yeah.
So I know that Jasmine does this a lot. So I'm gonna
Sure.
kick it off to you because you deal with their answers all the time.
Sure, sure. Yeah, we just started a UGA, an undergraduate admissions AI group, and I'm leading to do some vendor searches. And the first thing I told them was that for me, when I'm at a conference and walking through the vendor hall, it feels like being in a flea market where everybody's trying to tell me that they have like this amazing thing and it's the best deal you ever saw. And it's like they're trying to tell me they colonized Mars. And I'm like, did you though? Is that really what you're selling me? And so it's really going in with like open eyes and asking the critical questions. Like, you know your process far better than any vendor does. And they're going to want to demo you in a controlled environment with their controlled data set that they know exactly how it's going to perform. And they're going to ask it this question, and it's going to spit out the exact answer that it's supposed to, and they're going to show you it's right. And then you get the tool and you put your data in, and it's just giving you hot garbage. And it's because it wasn't actually validated. So like so much of what Jay said about like making sure that they can not just show you the result, but show you what data were they using to get there. So that you don't, if they show you a totally homogeneous list of data and then it pulled out the right answer, well, of course it did. There was no challenge there. It was all the same. It's easy to be accurate when there's no variation. So you really want to ask them hard questions. I would say it's important to develop an RFP that has like detailed use cases, but save the examples for when you have them live. Try to catch them off guard, see how they respond, see how well the tool does when they don't have the ability to like pre-feed it and pre-train it on like the specific 5 use cases that you know you need it to work on. So give them the task, but not the data, so that you can then make sure that it's doing the work you expect it to do in the way you expect it to do it. And with AI tools in particular, because there's so much burden on the deployer, if it is used in any part of your admissions decision process, you want to build in time to implementation that's longer so that you can really do that testing. And you want to see if you can work with procurement to get the testing before you've really paid for the product, so that you can make sure that it's going to meet your standards as an institution and that this is something that you can legally roll out and use it the way you want. Like Shay said, that was the tip that you gave about really diving into like the provider instructions for use. That really hit home for me of like making sure that we're all on the same page and I'm not buying a tool that I think I can deploy one way and all of a sudden I'm provider because that is not included in the list of bullets that they said I could use their product for.
Yeah. There's one kind of, I mean, one self-serving comment here is that you can ask also for audits, you know, because we audit these things all the time, and it's not like there's not people out there, and they don't have to work with Babel. They can work with, you know, get PwC or EY or somebody else. You can have the claims that they make audited, have some assurance over those. So if there's something that's really critical, like is this a valid test? Like is this AI actually valid for the thing you say it's going to do? You can have that. You can ask for a third party assurance engagement over that, and they can find people to do that. And what that means is another party like Babel comes in and says, okay, you've said statement X, Y, and Z about how you're testing your system. When we do an assurance engagement, we go in and we ask the tough questions about, okay, is this actually what you're doing? Show us the data. We can do that. And so you have more confidence. Now, of course, you might find things when you roll it out on your data, and that's always a worry, and you definitely want to build that in. But that is something you can ask. It's not an absurd thing. People do it, and especially if it's a really big contract that they're bidding for, they're going to be incentivized to try to make that happen.
Yeah, and you have to remember too, if you're asking them to do it, then they can use that audit with the next person they're trying to sell their product to. So it's in their best interest if you feel that the person who's trying to sell it to you isn't giving you the data you need, that's definitely a valid thing to ask for, and it'll be beneficial for them for the next contract they're trying to get, because then they can say, oh yes, we have been audited, here you go. And that conversation will go much smoother for the next time around.
So I see we're coming up on time. I could keep asking some questions. I got a couple
Sure.
of devil's advocate questions if you'd like.
Let's do one more question and then we'll close it out so people can get back to their day.
Okay. I'll do I'll do the less contentious question. Let's say people are not worried about compliance, whether you're in a state where you're not affected, say it's a small university, you're not dealing with Europe, or it's just not a priority right now. We don't think that, the regulators are going to start prosecuting the law, whatever the issue may be. You just don't believe in it. Is there a reason to be concerned about these tools? Is there an initiative that you should like a call to action, if you will, or should people just in general be worried?
Yeah, I mean, higher ed is always under the microscope, I feel, especially with the current political climate. Like, we are still dealing with the repercussions from the Supreme Court case with using race in admissions. And I feel like if there is any indication that you should be worried about legal action in the future, it's that nearly every law specifically calls out education admissions decisions. It is in there. It is something that is always on people's minds because we've done, I mean, for better or for worse, as an industry, we've done a great job of selling the idea to people that higher education is important and that it can change their life. And because we've got the buy-in from the population that it can change their life, it's a consequential decision and it's going to be called out everywhere. And I also think that even if you're not under legislation at this moment, investing in a tool that's not compliant will set you back years down the line, because at some point you're going to be under a jurisdiction where a law is on the books. And if you have decades of using a tool that wasn't compliant, now you have to rip that out of your system and put in a compliant tool. You have to meet all the other requirements of transparency, of training, of upskilling, and just like separate from the technology side, just like as a manager of staff, if I'm not upskilling them for AI, they're going to jump ship to a university that will, because they're not going to stay and let themselves fall behind and let themselves have career opportunities taken from them because they were at a place that wasn't looking forward to this. Just as much as our students are asking us for AI training and for upskilling and to make sure they enter the workforce with AI, you have to do the same for your current staff. And if you don't have that standard for your staff that you're giving to your students, they're not going to hang out. They're going to go and find a job and get the education and the skills somewhere else.
Yep, that was
All
perfect.
right.
I don't have much to add except for it's a waste of money if things
Yeah.
don't work. I mean, the whole point of it is efficiency and to do the job that you're currently doing faster and better. And so you don't want to spend money on that if it's actually not going to do it. So that's sort of like, even if you don't care at all about the compliance stuff, that there's some impetus for being a little bit more picky and careful about how you choose to use AI.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today for this AI and college admissions event. It's wonderful to have you here. I know that the people who were able to attend live with us today have learned a lot, and I'm sure that the recording will also get tons of views on YouTube as more and more schools get to a point in their cycle where they're ready to think about next year and think about compliance and figure out who to talk to in that. And they're at the conferences and sifting through the vendors. Jeffrey, if you just want
Thank
to
you so
pop a
much for
link
having
to
us.
Babel in the chat for the people who are here, and I'll also include that when I post the recording. And we do have more events coming up. So if you check out our LinkedIn group, which I'm sure all of you are part of, you can see we have 2 events in May. One focused on the history of AI and how it's evolved, so you can learn about it. And another focused on teaching students how to use AI ethically. So you can check those out and get registered. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. It's been wonderful.
Thank you for having us.